But it's good to be here. I see many familiar faces in the audience. I'm going to talk about the number 3 bill. I'm going to talk a wee bit about the review of fees and some of the critical issues that are facing the sector, and also just offer some thoughts about where the sector might head long term. And I do want to leave some time available for questions at the end. I want to start by acknowledging the important role that the sector plays in terms of generating funds for community purposes. Many good causes right around our communities benefit from grant funding through gaming machines. And I suppose the key here is that the continued availability, sustainability and integrity of this funding stream for those causes is really at the base of my concerns. It's at the heart of the Class 4 system. And that's why I think it's so important that the sector be perceived as safe, trusted and transparent. And so the context in which I'm speaking today is really about all of those objectives. In short, implementing a package of measures that seeks to maintain an ongoing and sustainable funding stream for good community causes that are delivered by trusted and reputable operators. So let me start with the current fees review. And I know that's top of mind for many of you, and I'm not going to get drawn today on what the specifics of the outcome of that might be, other than to say that the department and I have been listening to you, and we've been listening also to the working party. The key is this issue of continued sustainability that I referred to earlier, and the need arising from that to be able to preserve community funding levels. But at the same time, we've got to balance that with ensuring that the regulator is adequately funded and that the department can carry out the tasks that are allotted to it by Parliament in the form of the Gambling Act. Now, as I say, I'm not going to go into details about those matters today because decisions are yet to be made by Cabinet, but we're well aware of the overall environment within which you're operating and also future sustainability. And there are 3 areas that I want to highlight as being a particular concern to me. I know that there are issues that you've raised as well. The scheduled increases in the minimum rate of return, having to replace non-downloadable jackpot generators and having to replace banknote acceptors in gaming machines to accept the Reserve Bank's new currency. I think one of the good things that's come through this review process has been the establishment of the Class 4 Working Party. While I appreciate that the discussion around fees galvanised its establishment, I think it does highlight the need as we move forward for perhaps a more combined approach in the future. I gather I arrived just as a rather feisty or enthusiastic discussion was taking place on gambling harm minimisation. But this area and potentially best practice grant funding are areas I think where a more collaborative approach in the future might be a very good idea, and the working party model might be a very good option to pursue. It's often at a time when a sector is challenged that the greatest amount of innovation occurs. Now, reference was made to the number 3 bill. What I can assure you of is that it would be passed far more rapidly than the number 2 bill. The number 2 bill set all sorts of records. It was something like 7 years from go to woe. The number 3 bill, I think, is slightly over 7 months at this stage. I'm expecting it to pass through Parliament in the next few weeks, and I think that will be a very positive step. But at the time that I introduced that bill, I did say in my opening speech that it was one more in a series of reforms that were designed to keep the Gambling Act fit for purpose. And I made those comments in an environment where there are a whole range of external changes occurring. And that rate of change, I think, is intensifying, and it's an ongoing challenge for us to be able to keep up with it. The bill relates mainly to the Class 4 sector, and obviously the issue inherent in that is raising funds for the community. One way that we can foster that objective is reducing operational costs by stripping out some of the complexities in the system. And I'm thinking particularly here of the current Class 4 venue payment system, which I think is complex and costly to administer for both the operators and the department. Now, the bill, as you know, addresses that issue by clearing the way for the possible introduction of commission-based venue payments and adding a new regulation-making power to the Gambling Act. And for those who say that we are trying to incentivise new gambling operations through the commission-based approach, my response is to say they don't understand really the way in which the law operates and what our intentions are in that respect. We're also looking at the general issue of a new system for venue payments. We've been considering that for some time now, and I gather some of you have already had the chance to feed into that process, and there will be more opportunities to do so before we finalise a position. I think that work will be completed over the months that follow the passage of the bill. Good things take time, as they say, so a measure of patience will be needed here. There's a perception among some people, as I've said, that there's going to be an incentivisation here to gambling operators to maximise gambling rather than carrying out their duty in a responsible way. I think it's something you'll need to be conscious of. While I can assure you that is not the intention, it is something that we will obviously need to watch out for as things progress. A couple of other matters that I should highlight from the bill are the bill's provisions to give communities better information on grant-making decisions to ensure that we can have the best level of transparency. And to do that, we're changing the reporting requirements for Class 4 operators so that standardised information about individual recipients will be available. And grant committee members will have to declare any interest that they may have in community organisations that are successful in applying for grants. Every year, hundreds of millions of dollars is raised for the community through Class 4 gambling. And we've got to keep that figure very much in mind and ensure that the maximum amount possible is generated and that the distribution process is fair and transparent. And in that respect, the new conflict of interest provisions that were reported back from the Select Committee, I think, are useful. They make it clearer the sort of behaviour we might be concerned about, such as decision-making on grants with improper conditions attached. And that, I think, will avoid everyday transactions between, for example, a society and venue staff from triggering a conflict situation. The type of scenario, for example, where someone from a society buys a meal at a bar where gaming machines happen to be located. I think the new provisions are a reasonable compromise in terms of dealing with that issue. To just continue with that transparency and integrity theme for a moment, the bill also extends the Act's coverage to the management companies that Class 4 societies use, which allows them to be considered during the Class 4 licensing process and provides greater audit scrutiny of their operations. And finally, the bill allows the Secretary for Internal Affairs to issue licences to operators that last up to 3 years rather than the current 18-month limit. And that's again an incentive for best practice and better compliance. Now, both the number 2 and the number 3 bills are really about maintaining the current regulatory framework, ensuring that the sector remains fit for purpose while continuing to prevent the proliferation of harm. But I actually think we need to start to look beyond this. Questions are coming to my mind about the type of change that we need to be thinking ahead of regarding the continued viability and integrity of the community funding system over the years ahead. I think it's becoming timely to start to sketch out what a sustainable Class 4 sector might look like into the future. And I'm also mindful, as I speculate in that way, of the potential growth in online gambling and other forms of gambling. So I think there's an opportunity for us to have a look in a broader sense at our gambling laws and how they take account of these wider changes. And I'm currently talking to ministerial colleagues about these issues and whether it might be time, once the number 3 bill is passed, to have a good look at the gambling regulatory framework overall. If we were to do that, any such review, in my view, should consider aspects such as the overall cost of the framework, how people's behaviour and gambling preferences are changing in a technology-driven world, and ensuring that we can provide integrity, assurance and confidence about the Class 4 sector in particular moving into the future. I'll be making hopefully more comment about that in the few weeks after the passage of the number 3 bill. So thanks very much for giving me the chance today just to share some ideas and test some current thinking. I need to say that as with all of these things, there's a big proviso, and that is that policy and legislative change has a lot of hurdles to go through, and they all need to be crossed before we can satisfactorily say the issues have been addressed. But in the meantime, I think it's important, and this is why I'm keen to be here today, that we keep talking about these issues and that we keep the dialogue going. So thank you for the opportunity. I hope I've left sufficient time for questions, and I welcome those from you now.